Well, how's it going, everybody? For anybody that's watching this video, thank you so much for pressing play and being a part of this conversation. This series we're calling In This Family. About a month ago, we launched a video, and we had a couple of live conversations where we talked about what was important culturally and within our value system here at Grace Youth. And we're calling In This Family. We have something that we say all the time at Grace Youth, and that is we are one big family. And I love that statement so much because I start to see it surpass so many different avenues that's engraved in our culture. It's not just about where we live as a region. We're one church in many locations. We're one youth group in many locations. But one thing that I love about this family is our family is very diverse. We look very different, as we could tell in this Zoom meeting today, and it's a beautiful thing. So in this family, one thing that we've made very clear is we stand against racism. We stand against social injustice, and I make no qualms against that. So here's the big conversation. As a youth, as somebody that's living in this day and age, and that's going to be taking the mantle, we wanted to really engage in a conversation where you get to hear from your peers. I am the youth pastor of this church, and it's great. Mac is on our youth staff here, and she is phenomenal. But we're really here to just help facilitate conversation. One thing I'm super excited about is we've got an all-star cast of some pretty incredible people here to really speak on this topic, because I think they can. I think they should. I think they've got enough in them to really hold a prominent voice. So without further ado, we're going to get into it. I definitely want to do some introductions first. So this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to call on your name. And then when I call on your name, you just go ahead and tell us something about yourself. Tell us what grade you're in, how old you are, and whatever else you would like to communicate to everybody about you. So we'll start with Hannah.
Hi, I'm Hannah. I'm 17. I just graduated from Kingwood Park High School, but I'm going to Carleton College next year. And I don't really have anything super interesting. A fun fact about me is that I know the first 100 digits to pi, but I don't like math, so it's kind of useless information.
How long did it take you?
It surprisingly took me like 2 hours because it was like a song that I heard, and I was like, "Oh, I'm just gonna memorize this song."
I don't know what comes after 1-4. I'm over here trying to think. 3.14.
159.
1-5.
The commitment is real.
Yeah. I had nothing else to do.
Well done to you. That's awesome. That's a cool fun fact, actually. I don't know if a lot of people could say that. That's cool. Okay, we'll go to Sophia next.
Hi, I'm Sophia. I'm 14, and I'm going to be a freshman this year. And sadly, I'm leaving for a boarding school, so I won't be here to continue being in youth for this year, but it's fine.
Always family, Sophia. Always family. And I've got some little inside information for you. You ready for this?
Yes.
So we launched our online campus, and it's real and it's official. And we've got some things in the work for consistent online youth to be happening.
Yes.
It's going to be good. So it's not, obviously, I don't think it replaces, the hugs and hanging out with everybody, but you could definitely still be a part of the family for sure. And there's still going to be a lot of ways that you can be involved with your youth fam as well. So we're going to miss you, but always fam. Always fam. All right. Thank you for that. All right. We're going to go to Kaylani next.
Hi. I'm 16 years old. I'm going to be a junior this year. There's not many fun facts about me. I'm just living in quarantine. That's all.
A little birdie told me you're kind of thriving in quarantine right now. Is that true?
Thriving? I wouldn't call it that.
All right. What's been your favorite thing that you've been able to do in quarantine then?
Watch TV.
What have you been watching? And I'll stop asking you questions.
Uh, I don't expose myself like this.
Oh, The Passion of the Christ, right? You've been watching VeggieTales.
Yes,
Been
definitely.
watching.
Yes.
That's awesome. That's awesome. That's awesome. All right, we'll go to Jake next.
All right, I'm Jake. I'm 15, and I'm going into 10th grade. And,
Keeps the cleanest room for a 15-year-old boy that I've ever known in my entire life.
yeah, that's it.
All right, we'll go to Jalen first, since you're on the left.
Okay. My name is Jalen White. I'm 16 years old. I'm going to junior year, 11th grade, and I'm on the worship team.
Kills it. All right, Josiah.
Sup, my name is Josiah White. 14 years old, going to my freshman year. And actually, the other night, I had a dream that that I ate sushi at McDonald's.
Stop.
How'd it taste?
It was great. See, the thing is, they only served the regular sushi in the morning, like the plain, you know.
Wait, you learned that in your dream? Like when they served the sushi?
Yeah, it
That's
was a
detailed,
normal
bro.
time. And the spicy sushi was.
You think that's like a prophecy? You think that's like a prophetic dream? I mean,
Actually,
they be making everything else.
The next day, my brother came over. He brought me McDonald's, and he had sushi for himself. So he was just sitting on the table like.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's a little creepy, but okay. Awesome. Matt, you go ahead and tell us about yourself as well.
All right, guys, my name is Mac. I am not in a grade. I'm 24 years old. I get to be on staff at the church. Fun fact, this is the only thing that I feel like I can say about myself that is like partially fun. I'm double jointed in both of my arms, but I can't do like a little twisty thing. That's just, I can't do that, but that's my fun fact.
So if you can't do all the twisty things, how did you find out you're double jointed?
I just realized when I raised my hand in class that my arms just looked funky, and I probably shouldn't do that anymore.
So you're like this.
Yeah.
Teacher, I have something. All right. Sweet. Well, we got all the introductions out the way. I am so pumped to get into this conversation. So I'm going to open up with just kind of what we're going to be talking about today. In this first week of In This Family, we want to talk about how do I process information? How do I process information? Racial injustice is something that is still within our world today. And although the conversation may not be at the forefront, this is still a conversation that needs to be had. So as we're listening to all of this information that's being thrown at us, whether it be politically, whether it be culturally, whether it be our friends, our family, our teachers, those that are above us, those that are on the sideline, even those that may be younger than us, how do we take all this information and really apply it? What do we disseminate as truth? And what could be something that's wrapped up in maybe that seems just but may not be, or it, for some reason culturally it seems unjust, but for lack of a better term, it is. It's something that we should actively have a conversation about and find justice for. There's so many different of opinions when it comes to this topic, and sometimes it can be very hard to figure out really what my stance is, what I'm going to believe, what I'm going to understand. So let me ask this question just to start out. What has been the most overwhelming feeling for you concerning all of this that we've probably learned? It's been like a fire hydrant of social injustice. In your personal experience, what do you think has been one of the most overwhelming things? Go ahead, Sophia.
For me, it's fear, because I know for my Black friends and some family, like going out, just the fact of like having to always know your surroundings. Like my best friend, Ari, like there's some things that we just can't always do with like I would with my other friends just because of safety, and like always having to be aware of what's going on and always having to like know what can happen. Like, yeah.
Okay. Anybody else? It's good.
Sorry, I should have raised my hand. But I think for me, it would be like frustration, just because I have a lot of friends who are not Black, and they are kind of no longer my friends because they have these, not opinions, but they believe that it's one way. And even though I've talked to them and tried to like inform them with like practical information that's not like always filled with emotion, it's literally just like, here are the facts, they still kind of are like, no, like it's not that way, because I feel like as humans we naturally want to believe that people are good. So we tend to be blind to the things that our friends are facing because we are not experiencing it ourselves. So it's more so frustration at like, why aren't you getting it? Like, it's in front of you and you're not seeing it.
Anybody else?
Well, one of my initial like reactions towards it was anger. I was just like angry that this was happening and angry that it keeps on happening, like history keeps repeating itself. And also frustration that people just, like Hannah said, they just don't seem to get it. And I was like what the, why weren't you getting, like, why don't you understand that this is not good at all? Like, it's just ugh, that was me.
So what? Now let's talk about information. So I mean, one thing that I've noticed is there's a common thread here. You're having conversations with your friends, and it seems like everybody is getting information from somewhere, and you perceive it a certain way, and somebody may not perceive it that way, as plain as day as it may feel. Let's talk about that specifically. What do we think is the most challenging thing about when we receive information and how we process it as a truth? Where have you found your challenge in that?
Well, I'd say for me, with experiences, like people's personal testimonies and experiences, you can't say like, oh, that's not true because statistics show or whatever, because everybody's an individual. You can't expect everybody within a group or area to experience the same thing. However, with those experiences, you have to look at why those experiences were their experience. So if a Black person in the suburbs, like myself, says, I've never had a bad experience with the police, I can't say, well, every Black person doesn't have a bad experience with the police because I didn't. So it's understanding the things that go into why I haven't had a bad experience with the police. For example, there's not a whole lot of police in my area because they believe it's just naturally a low crime rate, so they don't need to over police. Whereas in other areas, a lot of predominantly Black neighborhoods, they're over police and there's a lot of police, so there's going to be more interactions with police and negative interactions with police. So understanding those things, understanding the factors that go into people's personal experiences makes it easier to process information, I believe.
I love that standpoint of personal experience. That's even something that the Bible puts emphasis on with the word of our testimony. There's the Bible says that there's power to overcome evil with the word of our testimony. I think it's just really interesting that it's very specific in saying that there's power in our testimony. So I love it from that viewpoint, Jalen. That yes and no. Whatever stats may be given, there's nothing that can necessarily trump the experience that an individual gets. Let me ask this question: where do you find yourself getting the majority of the information that's available to you? We hear stats, we hear people's testimonies, we hear political opinions, we hear all of this. What do you think is the number one contributing factor for somebody your age that contributes to the information that you're receiving?
I'll share a little bit on that really quick. For me personally, I've been trying to listen to people's stories and testimonies and in my mind a little bit, and like Jay, not only see where but social media, as overwhelming as it can feel sometimes, I'm finding that that's also a platform that a lot of people are sharing their stories and educational facts and stuff like that I didn't know before. And so social media can be this really negative place sometimes, but it can also be a platform of positivity and education and getting to learn things that we might not have known, in the past. But yeah, that's been my biggest, I guess, platform of information that I've been receiving during this time.
Anybody else have anything to add to that?
I'd add on to that and saying that, like, yes, I get like a lot of information from social media, and I feel like a lot of people my age do, but I always make sure to look it up myself and do my own research. I have a lot of books on African American history, a lot of biographies, autobiographies, things of that nature. I use Google a lot. And so anytime I see a statistic on social media, I want to look it up and use that same source that they use and see, okay, let me read the entire article so I'm not missing anything, so that I'm properly processing that information.
I really want to kind of hinge on this topic a little bit and really dive in a little bit more when it comes to processing information, because one thing that I think I've noticed just in interactions, things that are posted on social media, not everything is true. And unfortunately, that's on both sides. And here's the big question that I have. How do we, obviously looking it up is one way, but how do we automatically get to a place, or not, maybe automatically is not the word. How do we get ourselves mentally in a space where we're looking at information and we're making sure that we're looking at it through multiple lenses, just like you would anybody that wears glasses here. Sometimes glasses can clear up your vision and sometimes they can make them a little bit foggy. But one of the lenses that obviously will always give us truth is the Bible and what we believe. But the second lens is obviously morality, humanity. What we know is something that's evil against man. And it's so funny because they go hand in hand. They're one and the same, the Bible and that. So let me ask you this question. How do you, when you're processing information, whether you receive information on social media or you're citing specific sources, how are you trying to process information in your own life, in your own mind? How are you determining what your truths are? Go ahead, Sophia.
For me, I like to talk to people who don't have the same perspective as I do. Like, I'll do my own research, like what Jalen said, like go and like read the whole article, get everything you can so you get the whole story. But then like I always have people from my school sliding up on what I post, denying it, saying that it's political or whatever. And they just have they're one-sided always because of what they always think they're right. So I like to talk to them, not in like an argumentative way, but more of like conversate, like trying to understand what they're trying to come from and trying to kind of think about what I'm trying to say and understand both sides. So it helps me understand what I think.
It's good. Anybody else?
I like what both Sophia and Jalen are saying, like get context around the details that are being shared with you on social media. For me, what I've had to do is there's like a feature on Instagram where you can save things into a folder. And so just creating a folder where if I see something on someone's story or I see information being shared, I can put it in that folder and then go and look at it and process that information at a time where I'm able to process it maybe a little bit better, or just getting that context and not necessarily taking everything at face value, and reading around things instead of just being stuck in my opinion or my perspective or hearing people's perspectives, like so that.
Before I move on to the next question, I want to make sure anybody else have anything they want to add to that. I know it's a big question. So obviously, when we're deciding our information, I feel like this happens to me often. Hopefully I'm not alone when I'm about to say, but sometimes that becomes like a rabbit hole that I never knew that was really long. Like I'll get into some kind of something that makes me start looking up this information and that information. Then I realize it gets deeper and deeper. which is a good thing. That's what you want. But sometimes I'll find myself going into a place and then realizing, okay, wait a second. They just took something that is good, that is truth, and then it was expanded into something that wasn't. And this is on both sides of the conversation. Obviously, I think the thing that I'm hearing, that I'm loving, is don't be convinced of anything. Don't stand for one ideal just because that's where the majority of people are standing. Don't stand for another ideal because that's what that's where the influences are, or where they're not. Because I allow yourself to be convinced. Allow your mind to be changed. Allow your mind to adapt to the facts that come. And I think that obviously goes on both sides of the spectrum, wherever you lie on what you think is truth or not. If you're willing to listen to different perspectives and different people and allow your mind to be swayed, it can be a very powerful thing, but it can also be a very dangerous thing, because then you can allow your mind to be swayed into things that are wrapped. I always like to use the bacon wrap analogy. Have you guys ever had bacon wrap hot dogs? Like, hot dogs are good by themselves. You never had a bacon wrap hot dog. It's like you are asking for a heart attack the next day. It's going to happen. But what happens is you have a hot dog and you realize it's wrapped in something else and it's giving it a completely different flavor. You don't even have the hot dog anymore. One thing that I've noticed, Jalen and Josiah are loving this example, is so many times we see something wrapped into something that is good. I've seen a lot of the stance against racial injustice, which is real and prevalent in our society. All of a sudden, things get pulled into it that either dilute what the main thing is about. Like, one thing that obviously everybody's in the Christian faith, there's a pretty predominant stance on abortions, right? And I think it's just so interesting how rebuttals will automatically go to something else instead of continuing the conversation with racial injustice to really good conversations of what is right and just in the world, but utilizing one to take away focus on the other, or allowing the momentum of something that is just and right, that has a cause, and then wrapping it in something that is sinful or evil or different, and allowing that plight to now gain its own momentum from it. So let me ask you this question. How do we protect ourselves from that happening? How do we protect ourselves, and how do we engage in conversation with people where we allow ourselves to be open-minded? But the second thing, we don't allow ourselves to go too far into one path where we're allowing ourselves to really gain information or believe things that are truth that may not coincide with the lens of our faith or what really the keeping the main thing the main thing. Does anybody have any thoughts on that? Go ahead, Hannah.
I think that what helps me a lot is that when I stay rooted in my faith, like, I'm aware that, like, of my relationship with God personally, and when I am having these discussions with people, like, I'm remembering to be kind, and I'm remembering to just kind of, like, when Jesus was he was faced with criticism all the time. That's what I
life
to.
Yeah,
literally all the time. People were doubting him. So I kind of stay rooted in that, and just kind of thinking about what he was going through.
So good, Hannah. Anybody else?
Josiah wants you to repeat the question again.
How do we make sure that we don't allow, how do we keep the main thing? Racial injustice is something that is rampant in this world, but so many times we try to dovetail other things that may not necessarily be the main mission, or that may not really go in the lens of believing as Christians first. So how do we make sure that we protect ourselves from that? Go ahead, Jalen.
I'd say anytime you're having these conversations with anyone, peers, parents, whoever, keeping the main thing can sometimes be hard, especially whenever it starts turning into an argument. That's when you start to see the wavering in the topic, is whenever it starts becoming, well, I'm right and you're wrong. And you want to make sure, especially when you're talking about delicate issues like these, you never want it to be an argument because it's not getting anywhere. Then it's about winning, and it shouldn't be about winning. It should be about morals. It should be about love type thing. You know what I'm saying? So for the sake of my life and my brother's life and other people that look like us, I would like that anytime I have a conversation with anyone, and I think this can be advice for anybody else who may be struggling with this, that you always keep in mind that it's not an argument. So anytime you see yourself bringing up something that's off topic, remember it's not an argument. We're trying to understand each other. So that should help.
That's good. That's good. Anybody else? Go ahead, Kailani.
I agree with everything Jalen said. And there were, with my family, for example, like when it comes to these stuff, we have so many opinions, and for us, everything always is up with like an argument or something like that. So I've just learned to create sort of, I would just think like, okay, they have their own opinions. I know my parents, they can sometimes be stubborn, even if I try to convince them like, hey, like this is something like important, or try to like, I guess, turn them to my side. I think like I can't really do that because then I'm gonna be just as stubborn as them. So I just think I have my opinions, they have their opinions. No matter how much I disagree with it, I have to respect it or them for.
Yeah, especially since they're your parents. But I think it's so interesting because it's this delicate balance of you want to be convincing enough to be heard and to convince somebody.
Yeah.
But are we willing to listen the way that we would love to be listened to? And it's vice versa. It's a give and take. And I think that's the biggest issue when it comes to information, especially in this polarized climate that we're in now culturally, is nobody's listening, everybody is speaking. And that's a plight on humanity, not a plight on a racial injustice issue or a plight on forward moving conversation. Well, it is a plight on forward moving conversation, but the root of it is the fact that we're not giving each other compassion enough to listen. We're not giving each other room and grace to even when everything we know is being said is wrong. Listening to somebody for the sake of offering that kindness, and in turn it be extended back to you. I think I love the conversation that you guys are leading here, because that's what you're saying. You're saying it's not so much about proving whether you're right or wrong. It's about allowing everybody get to a place where they're willing to open up their minds and their hearts to listen to other people's perspective and maybe allow it to change your mind. And that's something that goes across the board. Does anybody have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think what Jalen brought up about not letting it turn into a disagreement, that's something that I personally had to work on, because it's with my family personally, it's so much easier. It becomes easier for it to turn into a disagreement. But what I'm having to remind myself is that I have to let God be God. And while I can plant a seed by sharing my opinions, and even I feel like we can plant seeds even just by opening up and listening to someone like Pastor Manny sharing. But I have to be okay with planting that seed and then walking away and letting God almost water it and let God kind of open that person's heart and that mindset, because that's only something that he can do. We can share and listen, but at the end of the day, he's the one that can transform people's hearts.
I love that perspective. Sophia, you had something?
I was just gonna say almost exactly what Max said. Like, she just took the words out of my mouth, all of that. But yeah.
I think it's a very hard thing to do, but it really makes me go back to what Hannah was saying about using the ultimate example of compassion, love, and grace in Jesus. I think he did that better than anybody. You think of stories like Nicodemus. You think of stories where even the centurion, where God is, or Jesus is walking this earth, and there are people that have different opinions. There are people that are there as signals of oppression. There are people that are hated culturally. There are people that have significance culturally. and they have opinions that may not be the right ones. But regardless, God had a seat at the table. And Jesus was looking for people that were willing to listen. Nicodemus is my favorite because he's the outcast. He's the one that was not liked in the community. And Jesus picks him out of a tree. And his only desire was to be seen. Another way to put it, his only desire was to be heard, to be recognized, to be known. And so many people discounted him because of all of the things that he would do against them, taking the money from those and then giving it back to the Roman Empire, right? But I think it's so interesting that Jesus created a space at the table, and he did not go in condemnation. He went in conversation. And that changed the whole thing. Changed the whole thing. So having that kind of heart that Jesus modeled, I think is key. I think that is the most important thing. So one thing that we put on our notes is so many times a lot of the things that we're receiving are symptoms of an issue, but not the root of the issue of racial injustice. And so many times people can be looking at symptoms and they'll utilize that as a tool to affirm something or be against something. How do we disseminate what is a symptom and what is a root? How do we cipher through all of that?
For me, I think it's looking at like information. So I feel like the root of racial injustice for Black people, like in specific in America, is slavery. Like I feel like that's not really a debatable topic. But when you branch out into like Asian Americans and Hispanics, and it gets a little bit more complicated. And I think, because of the George Floyd thing and all these other murders happening afterwards, we're only focusing on Black history. But I do think the other ethnic groups in America are important to look at. So whenever we're distinguishing the roots versus the symptoms, I feel like they kind of get blended because of history and how we're not looking at it.
There's a bigger conversation to be had, but I love that. That was a very concise answer. I love that you recognize that, man, there is so many things that stem into it, but really focusing on the root of the issue. And that is our history and what it's been founded on. And it isn't all rainbows and daisies. We have blights on our history that is huge, and recognizing where the root comes from and recognizing that it branches out is really wise. Anybody else? Go ahead, Jalen.
Joey, feel free to piggyback off of this if you want, but basically for me, like I definitely agree with Hannah in that like there's a lot of symptoms, a lot of like different branches, I guess you could say, in this like tree of racism. But understanding like in every story, in every instance, like you have to have like both perspectives. If you're reading an article, a textbook, a book, whatever, and there's only one perspective being represented, that's a red flag. If the person who's writing it, you have to know all these things, like who's writing it, who's telling the story, and how is it being portrayed, because all those things go into it, especially with history, and a lot of things weren't documented during slavery, so it's like it gets a little, it's hard to determine sometimes. But I feel like whenever you look at a story, you see both perspectives, and then you narrow it down bit by bit. Why did they react the way they reacted? Why did they do what they did? And then understanding it further, now you understand how you can do something to help, or how can we get out of this place? Why are we here in the first place? So we can understand how we can get out. I think that thought process usually works, at least for me.
Anybody else? Let me ask this question, because I think it's really interesting. Anybody ever take a journalism class in school? Well, okay, I was the only guy that took a journalism class in school. One thing that I learned, and you hit it right on the head, it's not real journalism. It's just an opinion unless you have multiple sources collaborating the same thing. And I think that's really powerful what you said, Jalen, because that is the the pinnacle value in a real true journalist is you can hear one thing from one person or find one piece of evidence to corroborate whatever thought or story you think. But until you can find multiple sources from multiple people citing multiple things, it really isn't journalistic fact. It's just an opinion piece. It's just gossip. And that's what it's considered in journalism. And I think journalism on whatever, it don't matter what you watch or what you listen to or what you read, I think journalism has become so polarized that I think they've lost that value. But it doesn't mean that we don't. And there's multiple sources in which to look, obviously get from different perspectives of people. But we have an advantage that a lot of people don't have. And that is we are one blood in one way, and that we're all citizens of heaven. We're Christians first. Before we're anything else, God thought of us, loved us, and made us first. And so it doesn't matter what we look like. It doesn't matter where our heritage lies. It doesn't matter what our culture is. At the end of the day, the very first thing that we are is we're citizens of heaven. And that's not to diminish our diversity, because those are things to be celebrated as well. But that's the unifying thing. That's called humanity. That should be the baseline place of acceptance for all, love for all. That's why this conversation is so important to be had. So let me ask you this question. How often do we use our trump card lens of the Bible and God's word? I want to have this conversation with you guys. In your experience, how much of this conversation has been led by opinions? And even there are things, I'm not discounting the conversation outside of the faith, because I'm sure there's a lot of really good people that don't know Jesus yet. And I say yet because I say that in hope that they will. But I obviously know that there's a lot of fact outside of the Bible. I get that. What I'm saying is we've got a trump card in our hands. How are we utilizing it? How, in your experience, in your life, are we utilizing our faith and what we know to be that extra stamp of approval? Look, I know this is right. I know this is true. I know this is just. Anybody have anything? Go ahead, Josiah.
I actually kind of looked on, like, a couple of days ago. I was in the Bible looking on judgment, and because there's a difference. A lot of people get confused with racism and prejudice. You know, it's like kind of gets like, you know. So I was looking on that, and because, you know, the Bible really talks a lot about, because, you know, Jesus, he was a Jew, and, you know, he was hated a lot by other cultures there because of his skin and who he was. So I was looking, because I know, like, the Bible can really go deep into and explain just judging people first, like what they look like. And it says, do not judge by appearance, but judge with the right judgment, John 7:24. And it went, like, I think it, like, uses the word partiality good with like back in racism, or back in, like, the Bible days, partiality, like, it doesn't, you're not supposed to use that. Like, the Bible talks about that in the beginning. Like, that was a sin. It's considered a sin, and you can
beautiful, man.
Back then. So
that's cool.
Yeah.
I just learned something right there. That's dope, for real. There's something that verse said that I want to ask. You just gave me an extra question. What is good judgment?
Oh, sorry.
No, it's all you, Bo. You're the one studying it.
Good judgment is based on their like Martin Luther King said, the content of their character. Like, it's not by we often, like, sometimes I can look at, like, a black person and judge them based on, like, if they're wearing a tank top or their pants are down, and judge them not even knowing them, you know what I'm saying? So it's like getting the character before you even think about any other wild, crazy thing that you can put in their lives. Yeah.
I think it's so interesting because you think of the pinnacle of judgment in the New Testament, which is the Pharisee, the one that think they knew everything, and they were very quick to tell everybody that they knew everything. And the conversation with the Pharisee was, look at you, look at the speck in your brother's eye, and you've got this big old log coming out your own. And I think it's so interesting because what's really cool about that scripture and what we're talking about here is it's very physical. It's a very physical illustration example. You're judging somebody based off of what you see, what you think you know. And I think it's so interesting that the writer is very kind of silly with it. Like, obviously logs can't be sticking out your eye, right? It's really kind of silly. But I think it's kind of, I don't know if you guys know this, but the Bible is very sarcastic. And I think there's a little sarcasm there in the sense of, look at you making something bigger than it is. And all the while, people could be looking at you and making the very same thing even bigger than what you think it is. And all of a sudden, we've now made our baseline of what I automatically perceive before I talk to you, before I know you, before we've engaged in any conversation, before I can really determine the part that is the most important. That's you as an individual, your character, your makeup, what makes you tick, not the way you look or the way you dress or even the way you act. I think that's really powerful, Josiah, for real. Thank you for that. Anybody have anything to add to that? Kalani.
Okay, so before I got into the chat, I had like this thought of the first thing that mainly came to mind when I was getting on here was the story about Moses and about how, back then in Egypt, the Hebrews were being tortured. They were being forced to create these monuments to false gods. And I thought, like, during that whole time, with Moses trying to free his people, God was like, there won't be peace. I will keep plaguing the land. I will keep on fighting until my people are free, until all of my people are free. And I was like, that's kind of like what's happening right now. Like, our land, I guess you could say, is being plagued by corona, and all this stuff are happening around us. And on top of that, all this racial injustice happening. I feel like God is saying, like, until all my people are free, every single race, every single culture, until all of them are able to go and just live their life all equally, then we can all be free of this.
Wow. There's a quote by Lee Strobel that I love utilizing because it's so true. Only in a world where faith is difficult can faith exist. Only in a world where faith is difficult, only through plague and through trial and through frustration and injustices can faith really be built up, because faith, at the very essence of it, needs to be tested. And I think it's so interesting that you say that, because it's a very unique perspective that I haven't even thought through. That, I mean, we talk about that scripture all the time. God works all things for those that love him, for the good of those that love him. All things. I love saying it because it's so true. All tells me everything: the good, the bad, the ugly. And although I don't think God is like purposely putting people through trial and plight. Obviously, another culture that can at least understand or compare what's been going on is the Hebrew nation, which Jesus came from. They've been enslaved and persecuted in very much a lot of the same ways culturally. And so I think it's just so interesting that you think through that. And why would God allow his people to go through that? No, God didn't plan it. Man did that. Sin did that. But why did God allow it? That's a big question that everybody asks, is where is the big answer here? And I just think it's so interesting that God has always utilized them to write the amazing book that we referenced today. God has utilized them to have the prophets speak from their lineage and their bloodline. The names be known all throughout humanity and nations. And I think it's so interesting that God has utilized that to build faith. Our faith is built off the backs of what they had to go through as a nation and as a people. I think it's crazy that God figures out a way to work all things for the good of those that love him. And I think that's a very positive and unique perspective, Kailani, because this does not feel good. It is doom and gloom, but God is still working a purpose in it. And that's amazing. That's amazing that, and I don't say this in a demeaning way, I say this in an empowering way. That's amazing that somebody as young as you can recognize that and see that. It's beautiful. Jalen, are you going to add something?
I can.
I'm sorry, I thought you were reaching for the unmute. Didn't mean to call you out.
But I will say this. This is something I think we'll touch on future segments and things like that. But in this generation, I've seen like a lot of people, especially my age, saying they feel hopeless. They care, they want it to change, but they feel hopeless. Like there's nothing they can do. They're too young, they're too small. They don't have a big enough voice. They don't have connections. How are they supposed to make change? And I feel like I was talking to one of my friends the other day, and he was expressing how he was like, I just don't feel like I can do anything. I feel like any effort would be useless. And I was like, well, one thing I really wanted to stress was that if we actually want to do something and we actually like care about this, then we have to believe. We have to have faith that this can be different. If not, there's no point of us having these conversations. There's no point of us talking about it. There's no point of us protesting or signing petitions or doing anything. We might as well be quiet and let it be the same. We have to have faith that God did not put us in a position to keep us here. You know what I'm saying? So
yeah,
that's just...
Well, how is faith stirred up in the gathering of his people, in these conversations? I think it's so funny because we think like what we're doing right now is not significant, but it is. Because Kailani, you'll grow up and you're going to be an amazing woman doing whatever it is that you dream to do, and you're going to remember this conversation. And then anybody listening to this right now is going to remember this conversation. And what we're doing is we're literally engraving things into our hearts and our minds that we keep with us forever. This is the most powerful thing that we can do. And I know that's a pretty broad statement, and that's a pretty, emphatic statement, but it's the truth. All the things that had happened in the 60s were great. The marches and everything, they were significant. But it was the initial, you know what, we're gonna speak about this, and there's gonna be people that are gonna really understand. And although it was a nightmare, at the same time, it opened up a door for people to be enlightened, to know, to be informed. And yes, we've got so much far to go, but progress was made. And all we're going to continue to do is continue to make that. I think that is poignant. I know that we're kind of seeping into two other segments here that we've got planned within the next couple of weeks, but this is about information. The most important thing to do is engage in conversation. We've almost come full circle right now. Like that's how we started this whole conversation. Be willing to listen and be willing to speak. And at the end of the day, I think it is the most powerful thing that we can do. Does anybody else have anything to add to that? Okay, this is what we're going to do. I want to go to every square, and I want you to tell me what was something that you felt like you learned today in this conversation. The whole conversation is about disseminating information and keeping your mind open and deciphering what's true and what's not. So let's see if we put that into practice today. We're going to start with Jalen this time. Jalen, what is something that you felt like, man, that either built my faith up even more, that affirmed something that I thought I believed, and now I feel rooted, or maybe I've never thought that before, but now I feel like I've learned something. What stuck out to you in the conversation today?
I'd say what stuck out. I'd say when Sophia was talking about her best friend Ari, and how there's certain things that they know that they can't do because of the color of her skin. I've heard that from someone that looks like me, like a Black perspective, but I don't think I've ever really heard anyone that's not Black acknowledge that. So that did my heart good, to know that it's not just something that people like me see, but it's also something that other people see, especially whenever they're close to people of color. So that's cool.
Love that. Josiah?
What stuck out to me is how to stay rooted in what you know in the Word and in your faith, because it's very easy to be filled with anger of what you see on social media. It's just full of hate and craziness. You know what I'm saying? So it's very good to, like, you know, regroup, you know, go back to and looking how to live more like Jesus and brings peace over. Yeah.
Yeah, you guys have been bringing some knowledge. You just came back and just brought the Bible into this. I mean, that's good. That's what we're supposed to do.
I had to get a little scripture.
Got a little scripture on that. Sophia?
What I took away from this conversation is to have conversations with people, because that's the only way you will grow, and that's the only way other people can grow too. So having a growth mindset in these conversations will get you somewhere, instead of just sticking to one side and your side only. Just listen.
It's good. It's good. Kailani?
Well, what I learned is kind of like what Sophia said, to have these conversations and also to keep an open mind, especially when talking to parents or to older figures who already have this mentality, to always keep an open mind to what they're saying, and even though you don't fully agree with it, just respect it, like I said before. But just always have that in the back of your mind when having a conversation about this.
Beautiful. Jake?
I think I've learned a lot from this conversation. I learned that, I have trouble with, knowing, what's true and, what's not true. I'm, talking about how you see everything on social media, and, just hearing, ways to figure it out, see what to believe, what not to believe. Yeah.
It's good. Hannah?
I think today I really was reaffirmed that it's not always an argument. There was something that I heard in January-ish, and I'm now just remembering it. It's debate the idea and not the person, because I have a lot of trouble whenever I get into heated discussions with people, and I label them as a bad person, but it's not them, because I know them as a person. They're good, they're my friend. I just tend to forget that it's their ideas. So I'm not really attacking the idea. I'm more so labeling them, and with the idea that it's not an argument. I think that's something that I can remember.
It's beautiful. Mac?
I think I was, like Hannah said, just reaffirmed to remember that it doesn't have to be a disagreement, especially as a Christian. My focus needs to be on remembering the character of Jesus and at least sharing that with someone, and not it doesn't have to be an argument. Sorry, not a disagreement. It doesn't have to be an argument about the topic, because that doesn't really get us anywhere. It doesn't get me anywhere, and it doesn't get the other person anywhere. But two, you asked a question about what has built your faith in this conversation. And I've seen so many comments lately that Gen Z is just going to change the world. And I really do believe, not that other generations are not a part of that, but I really do believe, and I feel so deeply in my heart, that the younger generation is just ready for it, and do it in a way that represents Christ well. And I really just believe that so much change, like Jalen said, we're not hopeless. So much change can happen and will happen, especially when conversations like this are taking place. So that has really built my faith today.
You stole my answer with your second one. I have been humbled. I have been blown away and inspired just by, I mean, I think the thing that impressed me the most is at the very end, you guys had so much to offer, not just in with your thought, but with your spirit, with your knowledge, your love for God, your love for people. I have been inspired. I agree with Mac 100%, but I'll be bold enough to say I think this generation is going to do better than every generation that came before it. I think you guys are equipped, and that's the part that's really humbling, because us millennials, we think that we're all that, and then you guys came in and you realized you made us realize that we're really not. You have a, I think this, if I had to have a specific label as a youth pastor, the thing that I've seen the most come from this generation, I would call you the compassion generation. I think you have a way of loving another person that is your peer group. As a matter of fact, I feel like you honor better than my generation honored even those above them. I mean that. I'm not saying that as this guy's a great youth pastor. I mean that. It's really inspiring to see that compassion and that honor really show. So yeah, that's been my big takeaway from today. Is I knew I was going to be blown away, but I have been surprised over and over by your answers and your love. So big thank you to everybody that joined in today. For those of you that are watching, this is just the first conversation of many that we have planned. Really, really excited about continuing this family conversation the next couple of weeks. It looks like we're going to be starting the next one off next week and publish next week. So please be sure to tune in for that. But I want anybody watching to know, regardless of who you are, what age you are, where you came from, what your background is, whatever, know that you're loved. Know that you're accepted. Know that you're a part of this family automatically, because that's the way God intended it to be. I love everybody that's in this panel today. Thank you so much for pouring your hearts out. Thank you for taking some time out of your busy days to be here with me. I know summer's almost over and you're like, man, Zoom's about to be my life, and this dude wants me to be on Zoom some more. Thank you. Hopefully this one wasn't as terrible. Hopefully this one felt good to release some energy in your soul, in your mind, in your heart. So thank you so much. Love you guys. Appreciate you. We'll catch you next week.